They sealed the chamber doors before they told me I was allowed to speak. That was the first thing I understood about the Corvith Inner Concord. It never asked permission for anything, including my silence. I had been ushered into the gallery as the Terran Trade Liaison, a title with no vote and, until that morning, no real function. 6 members sat at the long stone table below me, robed in the deep gray wool the Concord wore for closed sessions, sessions that did not appear on any public docket, sessions that existed, officially, not at all. Praetor Austin Vade stood at the head with a data slate already glowing, already drafted, already finished before the room had finished filling. The Unified Trade Rationalization Accord, he said, exists to correct an inefficiency. 26 member systems route cargo through redundant lanes that the Concord has, for decades, declined to consolidate. Earth is the worst offender. Earth has no alternate corridor registered anywhere in this quadrant. Earth will comply because Earth has no other option. He looked up at me, not unkindly, the way a man looks at a tool he is confident will not jam. Liaison Enk is present as a courtesy. She has no objection to file. I had been trading grain, ore, and salvage rights across this sector for 19 years. I had buried 2 trade attaches who died trying to get this body to acknowledge a treaty clause, let alone a delegation. I knew exactly how the Concord liked its silences, comfortable, agreeing, mine. Across the table, the youngest counselor, a narrow-faced man named Doris Vell, leaned toward Vade and murmured something I wasn't meant to hear. Vade's answer carried anyway, pitched just loud enough. She's a grain broker, not a jurist. She'll nod and will be done by the second bell. A ripple of amusement moved down the table, the kind that costs nothing and means everything, the sound of a room that has already decided how today ends. I gave them a different kind. I said nothing. Not a word through the reading of the Accord's 12 articles, not when Vade outlined the quota schedule that would have routed 40% of Terran freight through Concord licensed corridors at Concord set tariffs, not when the second chair counselor, a stone-gray woman named Therese Kale, noted dryly that the liaison appears to have no comment, as expected. I sat with my hands folded and watched the gavel get set within reach of Vade's hand, the way a man sets down a tool he expects to use exactly once. It took 40 minutes for the silence to start working on them instead of me. A junior clerk near the recording pillar kept glancing my way between transcriptions. Therese Kale's eyes found me twice, then a third time, lingering a beat too long. Doris Vell stopped murmuring entirely and started simply watching, the way a man watches whether he can't yet name. By the time Vade called for the final reading before the vote, his voice had lost its earlier ease, not fear, nothing so generous as fear, just the faint, irritated awareness of a man checking a lock he was suddenly less sure of. Liaison Enk. He said it like a challenge now, not a courtesy. You may object now, or this accord enters force at the close of session, binding on all Terran-flagged trade. I stood. The chamber's gray light caught the data slip in my hand, a single page, nothing more. I have no objection, I said. I have a list. Procedural right of record, Article 4 of this Concord's own charter, any party affected by trade ratification may enter a relevant inventory before the vote closes. Vade's mouth tightened, but charter law was charter law, and he had written too much of it himself to deny it now. He glanced at Therese Kale as if hoping for an objection of her own to cite. She gave him nothing. He nodded once, sharp, expecting 30 seconds of silence dressed up as procedure. I read for 6 minutes. 12 names. 12 independent trade compacts, ratified system by system over 6 years, none of them touching Concord jurisdiction, none of them requiring Concord licensing, none of them appearing on any docket this body had ever convened. The Halivar Exchange. The Pell Run Consortium. The Free Port at Iskatha's Reach. Each name landed and sat in the room a half-second longer than the one before it, because each name was a corridor the Concord's quota schedule had assumed did not exist. By the 5th name, the recording clerk had stopped writing and started cross-checking against a registry slate, his face going carefully blank. By the 8th, Therese Kale had leaned forward, elbows on stone, and was no longer looking at me at all, she was looking at Vade. Doris Vale tried to interrupt somewhere around the 9th, half rising with a procedural objection half formed in his mouth. Vade waved him down without looking at him, unwilling, even now, to be seen needing help. By the 11th, two counselors at the far end of the table had begun a low exchange behind raised hands, the kind of exchange a body has when it is recalculating something it had called settled an hour ago. I read the 12th name and let it sit. 4 days ago, I said, Earth ratified its supply agreement with the Varan cluster. That closes the last gap in independent routing this Concord's own quota schedule was written to exploit. There is no redundant lane left for this accord to consolidate. There hasn't been one in 4 days. I set the data slip on the table, face up, and did not push it toward anyone. I have no further comment. Nobody asked what we had already signed. That was always the failure in this chamber, not malice, not even arrogance exactly, just the quiet, bureaucratic certainty that a thing remained true simply because no one had filed paperwork proving otherwise. They had spent 6 years building a leash size to an animal that had been let out of the yard the entire time, and they had never once checked the gate. Vade did not withdraw the motion. I want to be honest about that, because the story is better with a clean collapse and the real one wasn't clean. He called the vote anyway, on schedule, out of something I can only call institutional pride, 31 in favor, 2 abstaining, the accord passing into force exactly as written, binding on all Terran flagged trade, effective at the close of session. I didn't argue. I thanked the chamber for its time and left through the same sealed doors that had let me in. The compliance reports came back empty within the week. Not refused, empty. There was nothing left to route through Concord corridors, because there was nothing left running through them in the first place. 40% of Terran freight that the Accord had been written to capture was already moving through Halivar, through Pell Run, through Iskatha's Reach, through 9 other names I hadn't needed to read aloud because the 12th had already done the work. A Concord auditor filed 3 separate requests for clarification, each one answered the same way by 3 separate Terran trade offices, none of them coordinating, none of them needing to. The cargo manifests were public record, dated, signed, and 4 days older than the accord that claimed to govern them. The Concord held a fully ratified, perfectly legal accord governing a trade lane that, by the time the gavel fell, simply did not carry our cargo anymore. 3 months later I was recalled to a different session, smaller, no public seal on the doors at all. Therese Kale ran it this time. Vade sat at the far end of the table now, not the head, a demotion the Concord would never call a demotion. She didn't apologize, that wasn't a thing this body did, but she opened with a single line before the agenda, looking at me the way you look at someone you've decided, late, to stop underestimating. We would like to know, she said, what else we haven't asked. I told her the truth, because by then there was no reason not to. We had never hidden the registries. We had filed every one of them through public exchange offices, in plain ledger script, on schedules anyone could have requested. Nobody had been holding anything back from the Concord. The Concord had simply never thought to look, because for 6 years it had never once imagined we'd had anywhere else to go. I watched the clerk near the recording pillar write that down without being asked to, and I let it stand as the only answer the session needed. I think about Vade sometimes, the way his hand had rested on that gavel like a man certain of one clean, final sound. He got his sound. It just didn't mean what he thought it meant. The accord is still on the books, if anyone wants to read it. Nobody enforces it. Nobody needs to. It governs an empty road.